Sony a7s III review. In this account, we talk about technology, gadget, marketing, and whatever we want. So let's get started. The Sony a7s III is finally here, and boy does it deliver. With huge improvements to handling and connectivity, a pin-sharp viewfinder, and, of course, hugely impressive low-light performance across both video and stills, it's the finest hybrid video camera you can buy. Of course, this all comes at a price, with the a7s III costing $3,498, £3,800, $5,999 for the body only. But, thanks to a long-awaited new 12.1MP back illuminated full-frame sensor, it's a best-in-class low-light 4K video camera, and with an also new Bions XR processor that brings 8x faster performance and an expandable ISO of 40 to 409,600, not to mention a class-leading 15 stops of dynamic range, the specs definitely impress. Being a Sony camera, the a7s III also delivers excellent, customizable autofocus, with 759 phase detection AF points and eye tracking across animals and humans, which Sony claims to be 30% faster than on the a7s II. This is combined with in-body image stabilization, IBIS, and active stabilization, which marries optical and electronic systems with a small crop factor. The 12.1MP sensor resolution means the a7s III can't record 6K, let alone 8K, video, instantly putting it behind much of the competition in terms of outright resolution. What it can do, though, is record for a very long time, and in very low light. With images captured at sensitivities between ISO 2000 to 4000 looking like they were shot nearer 200 to 400, the a7s III is a liberating camera to use, and, naturally, you can boost the ISO much higher. Sony has also improved focus speeds on the a7s III, and it partly puts this down to the sensor sensitivity performance, which enables the camera to identify subjects in lower light than sensors with inferior sensitivity. This is more than just a video camera though, and stills captured indoors look stunning, with simple incidental shots in dimly lit environments exhibiting an ambience and clarity usually missing from out-of-the-camera photos. When it comes to power, the new Z battery delivers what Sony claims to be a 60% performance improvement over the Sony a7S Mark II's NPFW50, which translates to up to 95 minutes of video capture, on paper. While we had a fair amount of variability in our device's battery life, it comfortably captured 4K video for in excess of 75 minutes in our tests, which is great going compared to much of the competition. The sticking point with the a7s III is always going to be price. It's a hefty investment, especially if you want to couple it with decent glass and fast storage, but the camera itself is the best in its class. The a7s III was released in September 2020 and is now available to buy either directly from Sony or from major retailers for $3,499.99, £3,800, $5,999 for the body only. The a7s III also launched alongside Sony's new CF Express cards, which promise to deliver read speeds of 800 megabytes per second and write speeds of 700 megabytes per second. These retail at $199.99, £210, $369 for the 80 gigabytes card, $399.99, £400/$699 for 160 gigabytes and $119.99, £130, $249 for the card reader. But if you find those prices even more eye-watering than the cost of the camera itself, don't worry, you can shoot on high-speed SD cards using the a7s III's other card slot. One of the big new changes from the a7s II is the arrival of fully articulating screen. Perhaps a bigger deal for longtime Sony devotees, and indeed critics, is that the company has finally opted for a full touch UI, and it works beautifully. It's hard to find anything to complain about when it comes to the refreshed design of the a7s III. It really does feel like a compromise-free zone for video, but we'd expect nothing less at this price. The a7s III features a 12.1MP resolution spread across a brand new full-frame sensor. With competition from Canon climbing up to 45MP and packing 8K video capture, the a7s III resolutely sticks with big pixels and a 4K cap. Its task is simple: to be the best 4K video camera it can be, excelling when it comes to high ISO, low light capture. Being a Sony camera, the a7s III also delivers an excellent, customizable autofocus system, with 759 phase detection AF points and eye tracking across animals and humans that claims to be 30% faster than on its predecessor. There are plenty of other highlights. The a7s III can receive an analog and digital input from its hot shoe mount, capture 16-bit RAW over HDMI when recording at 4K/60p for the first time, and it features a 9.44MP viewfinder, proving that photographers haven't been entirely forgotten about. With a similar body construction to the a7s II, you'd be forgiven for missing just how much of an overhaul this is going on first impressions. For starters, one of the custom buttons above the grip has been swapped out for a large record button, setting the scene for this camera's strong emphasis on video shooting. There's still a control wheel at the top of the grip, and this is joined by an on-off switch, a C2 button and dials for both mode and exposure, both of which can be locked. Despite the a7s III not having an official weather sealing rating, Sony has assured us that it can handle drizzle, and all the ports are under rubberized covers, on the left-hand side of the camera when it's held lens forward. These ports include a full-sized HDMI port, a real boon for videographers plus a USB-C port and micro USB port. It's an interesting choice on Sony's part to feature both, not to mention a headphone jack and 3.5mm microphone jack. If you're longing for XLR audio in, you can opt for an XLR Cam hot shoe accessory from Sony, for up to 4 audio inputs. On the right-hand side are the memory card slots and an NFC point. Buttons and dials are plentiful on the back of the camera, dotted around the screen like a candy trail. Starting from the top left, there's a C3 and menu button, with the latter firing up the welcome touch UI. Venturing past the eyepiece, the C1 button, AF on and all buttons line up neatly. Below, a handy 4-way joystick makes navigating menus in traditional Canon style a breeze, while an FN button, 4-way jog dial, select, gallery and trash button round things off. With a 1.44 million dot resolution, it's sharp enough, and we found it viewable outdoors in all but the brightest environments. We're still scratching our heads as to why Sony didn't introduce this sooner, but the fact remains that it's a very welcome inclusion, although one thing we don't understand is why the display isn't in the 16:9 aspect ratio given that the a7s III is a video-focused camera. Putting video to the side for a second, the a7s III's bright, sharp viewfinder is a photographer's dream, with crisp clarity, excellent coverage and ample brightness. And whether you're shooting stills or video, the Sony a7s III handles well because it offers so many controls and top-end specs. If you're a seasoned Canon user, the grip might feel a touch claw clasp inducing at first, though the a7s III still pulls through a fair amount of comfort and weight to counterbalance most lenses. The dials are all in the right places, and there are no less than 3 ways to navigate menus, so while this is a seriously comprehensive camera, the learning curve is anything but steep, whatever system you're coming from. One of the first things you'll notice about the Sony a7s III is how well it performs in low light. Ramping up the ISO is not a stressful experience, in fact, it's incredibly gratifying, with the camera able to handle high sensitivity mind-bogglingly well. The a7s III's low light capabilities make sense. Sony has created a brand new 12.1MP sensor which has huge pixels spread across a full frame, 35mm surface area. On paper, these specs aren't new, but with twice the readout speeds of the a7s II's sensor, a back-illuminated structure that's able to ingest more light, and a new Bian's XR processor powering things along, the low light boost isn't a surprise. That sensor resolution means the a7s III can't record 6K video, let alone 8K, instantly putting it behind the Canon EOS R5 on that front. As with the Sony ZV-1, we had no issues recording for in excess of 30 minutes, with the only limiting factors being the card capacity, battery life and heat, and the fact that we never experienced any overheating warnings or issues on the pre-production a7s III we tested bodes well for the final retail unit. Autofocus for photo and video benefits from 759 phase detection focus points, not to mention advanced eye tracking that's 30% faster than on previous Sony cameras. For video, specifically, Sony gives you beautifully granular control over your focus speeds. You really can get that pan focus effect with autofocus by touching the display when you slow down the focus speed, and it works very well, whether you're focusing on a flower, an apple, a cat or indeed a human. Sony partly puts this improved focusing down to the sensor's sensitivity performance, enabling the a7s III to identify subjects in lower light than cameras with inferior sensitivity. When it comes to power, the new Z battery delivers what Sony claims to be a 60% improvement over the performance of the a7s II's NPFW50, up to 95 minutes of video capture, on paper. In addition, thanks to the inclusion of a USB-C port, the a7s III takes advantage of fast charging tech, powering up 4 times quicker than via an old-school micro USB connector. What's also fantastic is that Sony doesn't impose its shiny new, ultra-fast, ultra-expensive memory card format on you, but it does support it nonetheless. Priced comparably to fast cards, these CF Express cards, which deliver 800 megabytes per second read and 700 megabytes per second write speeds, are beauties. Thanks to the a7s III's dual format card slots, though, you can also use SDXEV60 cards. That means 2 memory cards at any given time in the camera, and you can mix and match depending on what you have. You only really need the ultra-high-speed CF Express cards for Sony's SANT recording format at 4K resolution. With other Sony hangovers missing from the a7s III, buffer issues, clunky menus and the lack of an articulating screen, this camera makes us, as camera enthusiasts and professionals, feel heard. This sigh of relief is compounded by new features and enhancements that make day-to-day shooting and video capture a seriously future-proofed treat. For example, there's support for the new high photo format, H.265 video capture, and clean 16-bit RAW output at 4K 60 FPS. Moving on to image quality, we compared Sony's camera directly with a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 4K at ISO 16000 and f/2.8, at 25 FPS at 4K resolution. While the Blackmagic appears to have exposed the scene a touch better than the a7s III, there's no contest when it comes to noise handling. The a7s III is the clear victor. That said, the a7s III soars ahead, with virtually no visible image noise despite the footage having been captured in the dead of night, while the Pocket Cinema camera captures totally unusable, grainy footage. While the comparison footage was shot on a tripod, the rest of our time with the a7s III was spent capturing handheld video in middling light. With ISO settings ranging from ISO 2000 to 4000 delivering results that look nearer to ISO 200 to 400, the a7s III is a liberating camera to use. Even when we set the ISO to in excess of 40,000, the results were still usable for certain types of video, blowing the lid off a whole range of possibilities when capturing content across challenging lighting conditions, for example, fireworks, candlelight, and of course wildlife photography at dusk. Another area that's seen improvements is rolling shutter. Sony cameras have historically struggled in this department, but the a7s III's new sensor and faster readout speeds result in the jelly effect being hardly noticeable, unless you're a seriously aggressive panner. The 10 FPS continuous AF/A works beautifully when I'm tracking a person walking towards the camera, and it also did a great job with a tabby cat, although it struggled with a black cat when positioned slightly off angle. Stills captured indoors look stunning, with simple incidental shots in dimly lit environments packing an ambience and clarity usually missing from out-of-the-camera photos. In turn, if you're a wedding photographer cum videographer, and need a camera that can capture mood across both, then provided you're prepared to sacrifice pixel power, the a7s III is a top performer. Between the fantastic high ISO performance, IBIS and electronic image stabilization, handheld shooting on the a7s III is a great experience too. The stabilization won't totally counterbalance handshake, especially when you're using a large lens, but if you can find a thigh or ledge to rest on, you can get some fantastically steady footage.